but they also will see that automation is able to publish much faster, yeah? And the automation is able to generate much better traffic for that, yeah? Of course, this is also important to choose right KPIs, yeah?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our podcast. Today we have here with us Jerzy Gulczyński, who is the managing director of Ring Publishing. Hi, Jerzy. How are you?
Hello, hi. I'm good, thank you. What about you?
Fine, thanks. So let's just dive into it. Recently, I heard a great talk of you, and it was about automating, let's say, the distribution of news. How news websites and maybe also other channels are filled with relevant content. Can you tell me a little bit about your vision on the automation of news distribution and the importance of it?
Yeah. So, you know, we see that manual process of publishing is slow, yeah, is time consuming, is actually gut feeling based, and it is worth to automate that process, even though you don't want to personalize it, yeah, because thanks to the automation, editors can focus more on that creative job of story creation, and actually automation can release them from that boring and time consuming work, yeah. And it can be also valuable to that automation implementation from the perspective of user engagement, yeah, because thanks to the automation, you can actually boost and increase the engagement of your users, yeah. But when you go to the personalization, yeah, then the automation become necessary, yeah, because you have with personalization different versions of your homepage, yeah, for different segment of your users. If you have 10 segments, 20 segments, 50 segments, as we have today, it just goes beyond human capabilities, yeah. Mm-hmm. So you have to actually, so then the automation is fully necessary in the process, yeah. And this is how we did it, yeah. We changed the role of publishers. We engaged that automation into the publishing process, so the content is automatically published, is optimized by this algorithm, and publishers are rather, you know, quality guards. So they do pre-post moderation, they control the automation, they care about the quality, they are responsible for editor's choice, and there are actually less people engaged into that process, yeah.
Good. Well, I think that it's time consuming. I think everybody can agree, and that automation can reduce that. Seems obvious. I wonder, what is your experience with the following? I have heard editors who say our job is not only to write the content, to write the articles, but it is also to, let's say, rank them in a certain way on our homepage, to tell the audience, to tell our readers what is right now important in the world, and what do we believe you should know and actually also read right now. And so what is your experience with that, and how do you see that job in relation to automation?
Yeah, so this is really difficult change for editors, yeah, and for publishers. And this is not only about difficulty regarding process change or technical change, but this is also a mental change, yeah. And this is really crucial to, you know, care about these guys during that process and make them feel they are able to control the automation, because automation is actually to support them, yeah. And they have to find out about it, yeah. So, you know, newsroom is very demanding, yeah. The work in newsroom is very demanding. They fight with fires, yeah, especially in a daily newspaper, yeah. So they have too much work to do, and in between these daily routines, they don't have too much time to, you know, to change, to learn new things, to adapt some new tools. So they actually afraid, and they actually treat a change as a kind of problem. Yeah. And they also afraid about the results. Yeah. So they afraid that these results can be unpredictable, unmanageable. They won't be able to control. They of course afraid about even losing their jobs. Yeah. Because they live in, I could say, climate that we have now. Yeah. About cost optimization, and they actually see what is happening around the world. Yeah. So they should be involved into this process of change. Yeah. The process should be incremental. Yeah. It should be done actually step by step. They should have an influence on that process, so they can suggest or even decide about it. They should have influence on KPIs, goal functions that are used, that has been chosen. And they have to have a full support from the management board, yeah, and from the editor-in-chief. So actually, editor-in-chief has to be, fully engaged. This has to be a goal for editor-in-chief, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you mentioned that they want to control and want to decide that this is fully rational, because automation is not to do everything, yeah. So they need to have a control. They need to be able to pin a given article, for example, some kind of editor's choice on a given position. So this article will be presented, will be delivered to every user, yeah, independently of the automation and of all of these segments used by the personalization, yeah. So they can even decide that, for example, some articles will be shown for all segments, not lower than on some given position in some given sections. Yeah. Okay. They should be able to pre and post moderate the given article. They should be able to give to add some alternative teasers, for example, and then these teasers are chosen automatically by these algorithms. And they should have, of course, access to the data. Yeah. So they can see how the automation is working, if there are some actions required to improve it. They of course should see how much articles they pin on the homepage, for example, and they should discuss it and to improve it. In our case, we still have 20% of our time spent generated from pin articles. Yeah. So there are relatively small number of articles that are pinned, but the time spent from them is quite high, yeah, because they are usually pinned on the higher position, and these are really relevant and important news. Yeah. Okay. So I fully agree that they have to do this. Yeah. But they also will see that automation is able to publish much faster. Yeah. And the automation is able to generate much better traffic for that. Yeah. Of course, this is also important to choose right KPIs. Yeah. And I think this is crucial. Yeah. To build, if you want to build real engagement, you cannot be still attached to the page views metric, which is to some kind, pathological. So that's why we have chosen time spent. We introduced time spent. Okay. And because we don't like clickbaits. Yeah. If you want to be a reliable media, if you want to build a trust with our audience, we should focus on these KPIs that really reflect user engagement. Yeah, that's why we introduced that metric. We measure the time our users spend on the website on the given article. But what is important, we exclude these visits that last less than 5 seconds. Yeah, so we penalize clickbaits. Yeah. Okay. And these KPIs also should be, even reflected in some kind of strategic goals. Yeah. They should be measured, they should be monitored, reported on a daily, on the hourly, monthly, weekly basis. And based on this, they are able to improve it. Yeah.
Okay. Do I understand correctly that if you move to automation, that actually the job of the editor is playing at a higher level, meaning that in the past it was very detailed, choosing every article's position the whole time, and right now the editor is more let's say, defining the rules of the game, defining the boundaries in which the automation can play. So it's still the same job, it's still the same goal, only instead of making very detailed decisions, it is more about principle, rules, and boundaries. Would that be a good way to summarize it?
You know, probably it depends on the size of the editorial team, yeah, of the newsroom, yeah, because in small newsrooms, probably the same people are responsible for content creation and also for content publishing. In the bigger editorial newsrooms, some people are focusing on the content creation, some of them are rather focused on publishing, yeah, publishing in different channels, choosing this editor's choice, optimizing, getting statistics and improving, etc., etc. Yeah. So I could say that now we have less number of people engaged purely to the to publishing process, yeah, and then these people are able to do something different. For example, some of them switched to editorial team, yeah, pure editorial.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that it is possible for editors to manually override decisions that the automation engine has made. Do I understand? Is it correct to say that, let's say, in the extreme, every decision can be overridden? So the editor always has the choice to do everything manually if he or she would like to do that, probably. Or is there a limit to how much can be changed in a manual way?
It's not limited, yeah, but it's also measured. So they can see every week on some editorial meeting, they see how many articles, how much time spent was generated by manually pinned. Yeah, so they know they should improve in this. Yeah, so they can do everything, but in the same time, they should be aware that this is not very efficient to pin so many articles, yeah, because actually automation is better in doing that, yeah. So, and they clearly see, yeah, because we are able to provide the data about actually during the implementation process, we maintained that manual version of the process, yeah. So we were able to compare and to show what is the boost, what is the increase in comparison to the manual version, yeah. And actually, the boost from automation is really high, yeah. So it's of course personalization gives additional increase, yeah, but that coming from automation is I could say substantial, yeah. Okay. So for some sections, some most popular section, we see the increase on the level of 30% regarding time spent. On some lower, less popular section, we see even higher increases. So for example, the section travel, it is not so frequently updated by editors, yeah. So users do not see new articles there, yeah. But the automation is able to take some greenfield articles, some older articles, yeah, and it exchanging these articles for these users, yeah, and it generates huge boost, yeah. But the most important, I think, is that the general user engagement and loyalty is growing, yeah. So in total, in 2019, we generated something like 12% year-to-year growth in total time spent, but we also increased the number of heavy and medium users, and this growth was on the level of 10%. Yeah. Okay. So I could say that this is that this idea brings results. Yeah. Okay.
So you were. So I was interested in why is it better? So why is the automation better than the manual editors in let's say increasing the engagement? And you already touched upon that for some niche sections, that are typically disregarded by manual editors because they need to focus on what matters most, and that there the automation was much better in bringing freshness. And I think it's easy for me to believe that introducing freshness is also increasing engagement. Besides that, are there other, let's say, reasons you can pinpoint why automation is so good or an automation engine is so good at editing a news website?
You know, this comes from that you know, this process, this manual process is really slow. Yeah. So it looks like this, that to some extent publisher has to predict what will be performing the best. They are choosing some articles, they're publishing in some sections, and they are waiting for results. Yeah, and they can change the position, or they can reject that news from that section. They can add another, etc. Yeah, and then that process is really slow, and it is actually ineffective. Yeah, so the automation is able to do these tests, I could say, much faster. Yeah, so it is able to try a lot of articles. Yeah, and thanks to that, it generated the substantial increase of this traffic. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. It's actually
And
what
you know,
the manual process is doing, reacting to the data, but of course an algorithm can do that orders of magnitude faster than people can do that.
Yeah, and in the same time, you know, this diversity of content, the utilization of content is also growing. Yeah, what we observed 3 times fold increase in last 15 months regarding number of pieces of content published on the homepage. Yeah, so your content is that you create or buy is much better utilized. Yeah, and with segmentation, of course, you may reach the border. Yeah, you may realize that you need more niche content. Yeah, but what we see the growth, we call it growth of democracy and equality in newsroom. Yeah, because actually your users decide about popularity. Yeah, what is viewed, what content is good, what not some concrete person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes it is because automation can test and serve much more content, and actually personalization multiplies these opportunities. Yeah, so because you have many segments of users to which you serve actually much more content. Yeah. Okay. including also niche content. Yeah. Yes. So we say about that democracy and equality because our offers and pieces of content today, they have much more chances to find their audience. Yeah,
I agree. And I totally agree with your view, but some pushback that I sometimes get, and I'm very curious to see how you think about it, is in democracy, you also have populism, meaning that, let's say, some easy to read articles. So it's not really clickbait because really people spend a lot of attention time at the articles. But you can imagine that if you follow the user behavior a lot, then the easy-going content gets a lot of attention time from the users, and therefore is also put high on the website. And maybe some more serious topics that editors strongly feel about that they should be important, although people engage less because it's a difficult topic, get less attention. So I believe that following the signals of the people is good and interesting. However, you have there that component of all the content will become very light, very entertaining, and less serious. How should we deal with that?
This is a difficult topic. Yeah, of course, you're right. We see, for example, that some types of content or content bought or created by some editorial newsrooms are much better consumed than before. So before, some content was not published by the publishers, and now it is chosen actually by the automation, yeah, and it is published, yeah.
Okay.
So of course there is such a threat, yeah. There is a threat. That this threat is also reflected in you know, in social media, yeah, because, and this is something that is related also to fake news, yeah.
Mhm.
Because as you know, probably you also heard, on Twitter, fake news is spread 6 times faster than true, yeah. So
Yeah, I understand. And I think that's one of the big advantages of, let's say, traditional news media with newsrooms, that, well, they will not spread fake news. So I think the quality control there is crucial. And I can understand that with spinning articles, let's say, on top of automation, editors can control, let's say, the entertainment fraction of the news compared to the more serious stuff. But I'm thinking maybe there is also a solution where articles are categorized or get a value that says, like, how important is this? Or I think you can also put it the other way around. If you don't read this, how bad is it? Like the editor says, if it gives it a score like 5, okay, it's super bad if you did not see this. And based on that value, of course, the automation would, even if the response to the article is not fantastic, the automation would push the article high. Is that something that you're already doing, or do you feel it's a good idea?
we are not doing, but this sounds like a good idea.
Okay, I think I got it in another podcast from Ludwig from Shipstead. So I believe they are doing it. So I thought it was an interesting line of thought. You already mentioned a few times, well, automation is one thing, but personalization on top of the automation is even more interesting, because you can really start tailoring for people individually or for segments, which even increases engagement more. But when it comes to personalization, I believe that the security that an editor still had in automation, where it was really easy to see, okay, this is what the people are seeing, and I can change some things and I'm still in control. When you move more to personalization, that control is is becoming more and more difficult, I would say. Is there a way to deal with that, or is it just a matter of, well, getting used to it and accepting it?
So probably this is some kind of also important from the perspective of the process, yeah. So you should have a process that allows you to control it, yeah. So the news you buy, the news you create should go through some process, yeah. So this is one thing. The second is that some sections that you treat as the most important, for example, or you are aware of such a risk as you mentioned, you could, for example, pre-moderate. Yeah, so we have some sections that are pre-moderated. So there is a list of news that are proposed by some editors, but finally, these news are going to this automation process, to that personalization mechanism before, after it is approved. Yeah. So there is also such an option to do this that way. Yeah. And of course, some sections are not pre-moderated. Yeah, some of them are just post-moderated. Yeah, and some of them are, you know, takes into account huge collections of data, of articles. Yeah, so this is not very easy to control them.
If you talk about pre-moderating a section, do I have to understand it like as follows? You have an editor saying the first so many lines of the website are going to be filled with these articles, but the automation of the personalization can change the order. Is it like that, or is it different?
Yeah, so this is some kind of so there is some kind of proposal from the editors that this is a news that should be, let's say, taken into account in this section or in this category, and then based on that collection, and this collection is potentially, quite big, the automation is using it to personalize that news for according to these segments and user interests. Yeah. So it's some kind of collection of articles that were pre-moderated. Yeah. So they are checked, they are verified, but this is not five positions. There are a lot of potential topics and titles and articles that are then used by automation and personalization. Yeah, so they are served to these guys, to this audience, readers who are interested in that.
Okay. So when we talk about personalization and news personalization, for me, it's always interesting to see, like, how does the news industry compare to other industries? I would say very interesting examples of personalization are Spotify in the music industry, Netflix in the video industry, Amazon in retail, e-commerce. Do you feel news is very similar to all of them, or do you see very key differences between, on the one hand, news, and on the other hand, these other industries?
So it seems to me that they are rather more related to individualization, yeah, because there are not so many fresh, I could say, articles or music or films. So they are rather in context provided that the personalization, this is kind of true personalization. Yeah, so they take into account individualization, and this is, I think, also similar in e-commerce. Yeah, this is something that we work on. Yeah, this is something that we want to use to extend that segmentation with kind of individualization. Yeah, this is something that we also work on for e-commerce.
Okay.
But from that perspective, I think this is different. Yeah.
Okay. When it comes to news, you touched upon it. You have personalization, like individual, one-to-one, and you also have segmentation. How do you compare them? Is segmentation a intermediate step towards full individual personalization, or is it a final destination on its own?
I find that this is kind of, regarding news, this is some kind of step-by-step approach. Yeah. So even though we want to implement personalization for our customers, we start from automation. Yeah. Because so we start actually with one segment, because this is, as I mentioned, very difficult change for our editorial team, but also you are not able to do this immediately. Yeah, so you have to somehow first integrate on some kind of technical level, so you are sure that you have enough performance, and you cache this content properly, etc., etc. When you have that integrated, then you can go to the first step, which is automation. Yeah, and then you can iterate based on this. Yeah, so I think that this individualization idea is kind of another step that will generate another increase in engagement. Yeah, we treat it that way.
Okay. You just said something that I think is very interesting. It had to do with integration and with, let's say, robustness and quality of the technical setup. Of course, when you automate a process, it's based on a lot of signals, user behavior that comes in and then is processed and an output is generated. Do you feel that there is, let's say, a risk that some of these data pipelines break, therefore the information is actually damaged and the decisions based on that information will also be wrong? Is that a big risk? Is that something that needs a lot of attention when doing such projects? Or do you feel that I'm exaggerating let's say, the topic?
So I think that you have to be really careful, yeah, about this, yeah. And of course, personalization is very demanding. So it engages also a lot of computing power, and it's also difficult from the perspective of serving all of these segments, and content, different versions of these content sections and actually home pages. So it is very demanding. We had a situation that we had turned off personalization on the web page, yeah. So especially during this year, we had such a huge traffic peaks, 3, 4, 5, even more times more traffic, and we encountered the situation that we actually had to turn off personalization, and we switch some percentage of our traffic to automation. Yeah. So we were able to balance in this, but we had such a situation. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I understand that it is demanding and it requires a lot of computing power. Okay.
Yeah, you can actually spoil a lot, yeah, if you don't do this some kind of incremental, yeah. So we usually starting from the technical integration, which allows us to make sure that we are ready from the technical perspective, scaling, performance, caching, etc. Then second, we of course integrate some tracking solution, thanks to which we are able to collect the data about users, about their behaviors, clicks, and time spent, etc. Then we start from automation from one segment, and based on the data collected, we perform kind of simulations to choose actually right algorithm, because some algorithms, for example bandit algorithms, are better for the lower traffic, others are better for the higher traffic. And then we start to experiment. We actually start with some small number of segments and for some smaller amount of traffic, yeah. And then we increase, yeah. And then we look on the results. So if this content is better consumed in comparison to the baseline, we are looking at diversity of the content that is served to users, and we again tune it, and we again make some new simulations, and then we increase the traffic or number of segments, etc., yeah.
Okay.
So we started at Onet, we started from 6 segments, then we have 11, then we have 21, then we have 51, and we every time we did it step by step. But we discovered that with the growing diversity of content consumed, with growing actually number of segments, this diversity of content that is actually consumed by users is growing, yeah. So it somehow reflects the potential to increase number of segments, yeah.
Okay.
But you can account, of course, the border of number of content that you have, yeah, and then you have to consider buying new content, buying some kind of niche content to extend the potential.
Well, you were talking about the need for sometimes even turning off the personalization because of high traffic. I'm not sure what the high traffic was about, but I can imagine that the pandemic had something to do with it. So about this pandemic, I think it's like very relevant right now. It's a big event happening. Do you see that it influences the behavior of users? Or do you feel like, well, it's something big happening, but it does not fundamentally change how people consume news?
In general, I think that in this time, internet, sorry, for many of us is the only way to to communicate with the world, to communicate with others. So we as employees, but also as customers, we are affected all by this digital transformation. So this digital transformation actually accelerates. I personally spent a lot of time in front of this computer screen, and I am taking part in video conferencing meeting, and I'm chatting on Microsoft Teams. This year, I took part in a few conferences, which were conferences on the there were actually online events. Yeah, I was a speaker, of course, also on some conferences, and we did it via Zoom. Yeah, I personally bought a lot of things this year online. So offline, I mostly buy only food. Every Saturday, for example, we order a dinner from some restaurant nearby, also to support to some extent this business, which is in trouble. Yeah, and we all do this online without even calling. We watch more video. Yeah, we watch more series, for example, on some kind of VOD subscription services. We meet even our colleagues to drink something, yeah, together. Yeah, this year we had, for the very first time, a company party called People Award, fully online. 1,000 people were participated in this, and it was really great event. Yeah, and I also see, looking, for example, on my wife. Yeah, she was never convinced to do shopping online, especially regarding clothes. Because she was thinking that this is difficult to order. She's not sure about that concrete product. What she will do this with if she doesn't like it. But now she likes this, yeah, and she see advantages, and she find it convenient. She can order very quickly. She can give it back without any additional payments. Yeah. So I think that we all, changing our mindset. We learn new services, we get actually new skills, and we get used to that new, services that we have. Yeah, so we will stay with them, and our habits will actually, they has changed already. Yeah, so we want back to many of these habits that we had before. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I see the growth in VOD, of course. There is a huge growth in e-commerce. There is a growth in paid content. At the beginning of the year, we seen 2-3 times higher dynamic in comparison to that we had before pandemic. There is, of course, increasing growing number of webinars. There are more video conferencing. There are more messaging. The medical site, one of our medical site, the biggest site, MedOnet in Poland, in the fastest growing, is providing these health information, advices, statistics, data about some advices regarding food, sport exercises, etc. So these data are consumed. This content is consumed. Yeah, news is also consumed much more, yeah, than before. Okay. Because people are looking for reliable sources of information in these difficult times. That reliable information is very important to them. Okay. And I see that also that pandemic, that this huge change brings new opportunities. Yeah. So, for example, we had a Business Insider Trend Festival that usually we organized it locally. So it was a local event. And this time we had it global. We had it in US, in Germany, in Japan, in India. It took place over 5 days in several time zones on 5 stages, actually. We had 250 great speakers from all over the world and thousands of guests. Yeah. So pandemic is also providing new capabilities. Yeah, and definitely it accelerates digital transformation. Okay. And it changes the behaviors, yeah, of users. Yeah. Would you agree? It changes our mindset. Yeah. Yes, I agree. Would you agree that the news brands, let's say, that are capable of right now, when the attention of
the readers is high because of the pandemic, that are capable of let's say using the opportunities that are there for them, are also the ones that are going to like catch a larger audience right now and then keep that audience in the future? Is this the time to seize the moment?
I think that these changes in behavior will be to some extent, permanent. Of course, this situation is really special, yeah, because today people are really looking for reliable sources of information. But this growth in paid content, for example, the print is decreasing much faster than before. It was decreasing 8-10% every year regarding the circulation. But in April, we've seen decrease by 20% in comparison to the previous year. And we also, based on our some kind of estimations, we see that in regular situation without COVID, we would be in that state in next 2 years. So this drop is substantial, yeah. But in the same time, there is a nice growth in paid content, yeah. So this is some kind of the chance for publishers, yeah.
Okay.
I hope that they will utilize that chance.
Okay, so before we finish here, one question I would like to end with. You're now already, let's say, working on automation, personalization for quite some time. If you would look back at yourself, let's say a few years ago, when you started with all this, what advice would you give to yourself about things to absolutely do, but also things that you did that you feel like I should have avoided them or do them differently?
So I think that, that topic become a bit commodity, I could say, yeah. So there is more and more technologies on the market that you can use, yeah. So for example, we realized that now Amazon is providing quite similar technology that we are using, yeah, and there are some similar ideas implemented. Maybe it's not exactly the same. Maybe for us it could be a bit too expensive today, but definitely for smaller publishers and publishers who want to start, this is some kind of the option, yeah. So what I would recommend in the topic, to look around on the market and not to invest to it too much by your own, yeah, not to build that from the scratch by your own, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one kind of the advice, yeah.
I think that's a sensible advice. Is there more, or is this really the crucial advice that you would give to yourself?
What else? Definitely what I can advise, but this actually comes from our experience, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That this should be definitely incremental and iterative process, yeah. And it took, this will take some time, yeah. This is not very easy and very fast to implement, yeah, because this is also about kind of change of mindset, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This has to be somehow also related in change related to data-driven company, yeah. So you are not, if you are not too data-driven, it would be difficult to do this also, yeah.
Yeah.
There is a question, of course, about the technology, yeah, because technology plays really crucial role now in this digital transformation, yeah. And the question is if you have enough competences, tech competences, yeah, in your team, yeah. If you treat technology as really important part, yeah, of that business you do, yeah. So it may turn out that you are not able to build these competences internally, yeah. It may turn out that it would be better to buy some external company
Yeah.
that is purely digital. Yeah, this is what happened actually in Ringier Axel Springer. Yeah, they bought in 2012 Onet, which was purely digital, tech-based, and based on this, they were able to to implement media and tech company. Yeah.
Yes.
And even though you buy it, even though you have it already, yeah, this is not very easy to to perform such a change. Yeah, because actually in our situation it was a clash of totally different cultures, publishing, pure old publishing, and and digital. Yeah, and final product, final organization is kind of result of that clash. Yeah, so even though you have it, you have to continue. Yeah, so this is something that I also recommend. I think that publishers are a bit delayed in this digital transformation, and they were waiting too long. And now, in the longer you wait, the gap is the bigger. Yeah, and this is not about transforming this audience from print to digital, because in many times this is totally different audience. And of course, some of these guys moving to, for example, subscription, because now they just are not able to buy a regular newspaper, or they find this is something they can do now. Yeah, as my wife decided to not to buy or to use e-commerce and do shopping. So some of them are changing their mindset, but of course some regarding print and digital, this is totally different audience. Yeah,
Okay.
that
No,
you have to create.
I think that's great advice to end with. It's not only technology; it's also culture. So Jurek, thanks a lot for being with us. I really enjoyed talking to you. I think you had some great insights. I want to thank you for sharing them with the world. For our viewers and listeners, thanks again for being with us. And don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for other episodes. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.